My name is Hannah Miller. I'm 34, and I always believed Christmas was supposed to bring families closer. For years, I poured my paycheck into my parents' house, covering the mortgage, the cars, the lights, even while they treated my sister Jessica like the golden child and looked right through me. I told myself that if I kept giving one holiday, they would finally see me. But last Christmas dinner, instead of gratitude, I was told I wasn't family accused of jealousy, and left staring at faces that had turned cold. What would you do if the very people you sacrificed everything for pushed you out on Christmas night? Stay with me because what followed shook the entire house to its foundation, and you won't believe how quickly the story turned. Let me take you back to where it began. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Lansing, Michigan, in a house that always felt smaller than it looked from the street. It was a two-story place with pale blue siding that had faded over the years and a roof that leaked whenever the rain came down too hard. In the backyard stood a crooked swing set that leaned to one side after years of weather, the chains squeaking whenever the wind blew. That house carried every memory of my childhood, both the good ones and the kind that shaped the bitterness I would carry into adulthood. My dad, Robert, worked for almost 2 decades at the local auto plant as a shift manager. He wore his dark blue uniform like a badge of honor, and I can still remember the heavy smell of oil and steel that clung to him when he came home late at night. His hands were scarred and calloused, evidence of the work he put in, and he walked with the sort of pride that came from steady employment. My mom, Linda, worked part-time as a receptionist at a dentist's office. Her job was not glamorous, and she never pretended to like it, but she showed up each morning because the paycheck helped cover groceries. She would come home with tired eyes, change into her slippers, and move on to making dinner, as though exhaustion was simply part of her routine. In 2010, the balance of our family changed overnight. The plant downsized and Dad was let go despite his years of service. I was in college at the time, but I came home the weekend he got the news. The silence in the living room was thick enough to choke on. Dad sat in his recliner staring at a muted television, the remote slipping in his hand. His shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen before. Mom tried to stretch her paycheck, but no matter how carefully she planned, envelopes with overdue notices began stacking on the counter. At night, their whispered arguments seeped through the walls. It was the first time I understood what it meant for a home to feel unstable. Even before that day, I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was the firstborn, the reliable one, the daughter who never caused trouble. I followed the rules, studied hard, and stayed quiet. My younger sister Jessica was 6 years younger than me, and she was the shining star in their eyes. If she scraped by with the bare minimum, she was celebrated like a champion. I remember one Christmas in particular. Jessica had just finished the school year with a C average, nothing remarkable. Yet under the tree sat a brand new pink bicycle with a woven basket and shiny ribbons tied to the handlebars. Mom clapped her hands with delight as Jessica squealed and hugged the frame, and Dad knelt down to adjust the training wheels, his face glowing with pride. I stood nearby holding my report card with straight A's, waiting for someone to notice. Dad glanced over, gave me a quick pat on the shoulder, and muttered, "Keep it up, kiddo," before turning back to my sister. That was the moment I learned that doing well would never be enough to make me special in their eyes. It was not just that holiday. Jessica always received more. She got the larger bedroom, even though she was younger. She wore new clothes while mine came from cousins or discount racks. At every school event, Dad's voice boomed from the bleachers whenever Jessica's name was called, even if it was for a participation ribbon. When I walked across the stage to accept an academic award, his applause was polite, almost absent. One afternoon when I was about 10, Jessica came running through the door with a math worksheet scored at 60%. Mom looked at her, kissed her forehead, and told her she had done her best. Then she announced we should go get ice cream to celebrate. That same week, I had placed first in the regional spelling bee, but the ribbon remained folded in my backpack. No one asked about it, so I said nothing. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning lazily above me, wondering why my best never seemed enough. It was around that time I realized Jessica had learned how to play into her role. She acted as though applause belonged to her by default. She interrupted me at the dinner table, and if I objected, Dad scolded me for being too harsh. Mom often said Jessica was sensitive and needed extra encouragement. I was told I was strong enough to manage without it. As the years passed, nothing changed. Jessica's confidence grew fueled by constant praise, while I became the quiet achiever who knew she would never measure up. I pinned my hopes on the idea that someday my hard work would force them to see me. I thought that when I graduated with honors, they would beam with pride, or that when Jessica failed, they would finally realize the weight I had carried for so long. But recognition never came. When Dad lost his job, the favoritism deepened. Jessica was still in high school, and Mom and Dad poured what little they had into keeping her life comfortable. She went to cheerleading practice, came home to hot meals, and still received spending money. Meanwhile, I was juggling part-time shifts at the campus library and tutoring just to cover my books and meals. I told myself they were doing their best, but deep down I knew the truth. Their best was always reserved for Jessica. Looking back, I can see how that imbalance shaped everything about me. It was not just a phase or a rough patch, it was the foundation of our family. I was the dependable daughter who would always figure things out. Jessica was the fragile star who needed constant support. That truth became the quiet wound I carried into adulthood, the wound that would bleed into every decision I made. It is hard to explain what it feels like to grow up unseen, to know that no matter how much you give it, will never be enough. That knowledge sat in the back of my mind through every success I achieved and every sacrifice I made. And it was the reason why years later at a Christmas dinner that should have been filled with warmth and laughter, the imbalance would finally explode in a way none of us could undo. When I graduated from Michigan State in 2013 with a degree in computer science, I thought I had finally earned my freedom. I had survived 4 years of student loans night shifts at the library, tutoring high school kids and endless cups of coffee just to stay awake. My diploma felt like a ticket to something better, a way to step outside the shadow of my family's expectations. But even with that piece of paper in my hand, I walked across the stage, already carrying the weight of responsibility I knew I could never put down. Those early years were brutal. Rent in East Lansing was high even for a student, and by the time I finished my degree, I had racked up more debt than I liked to admit. My friends celebrated with summer trips and internships in New York or Chicago, but I took extra shifts at a diner on Grand River Avenue, balancing trays of greasy burgers and watery sodas just to scrape together enough to cover interest payments. 2 years later, in 2015, I landed my first real job in Detroit. Midwest FinTech Solutions was a growing company in the heart of downtown, and they offered me a salary that seemed like a fortune compared to what I had been making. I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment on the east side, bought myself a used Honda Civic, and thought maybe for once in my life I could breathe. For the first time since I was a child, I felt the flicker of pride in my own stability. That was when the phone calls started. At first, Mom would check in with friendly questions. How was work? How did I like the city? Did I meet anyone? Then the tone shifted. She began telling me about late fees piling up, about the roof that needed repair, about how Dad's unemployment checks had run dry. One evening, she cried quietly into the receiver about how their car might be repossessed. I sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at my own stack of bills, and felt the guilt rise like smoke in my chest. So I offered to help. At first, it was a one-time payment just to catch them up. Then it became a monthly mortgage check, $800 a month. Add $400 for utilities, $600 for the car payment, and suddenly I was covering nearly every major expense they had. By the time I included the smaller things, the family cell phone plan, the internet bill, even streaming services, it totaled almost $30,000 a year. 8 years later, that number would add up to nearly $250,000, money that could have gone into my own retirement fund or toward a down payment on a house, money that could have let me breathe. Instead, it went into the black hole of my parents' household, disappearing with barely a thank you. Jessica, meanwhile, was living a completely different life. After high school, she wanted to try culinary school, and somehow my parents scraped together the money. When that failed, they funded her dream of opening a coffee cart. That lasted 6 months before she lost interest. Then came the online boutique, the crypto investment group, and eventually a plan to start a wellness app. Each time she called it her big break. Each time it ended in failure. And through it all, my parents stood by her with unwavering support. I cannot count the times I sat at their kitchen table on visits home watching Dad brag about Jessica's entrepreneurial spirit, while Mom smiled proudly. They talked about her as if she were destined for greatness, while I sat quietly, the daughter whose steady paychecks kept the lights on. If I mentioned the stress of carrying both my life and theirs, Dad would wave me off. Family helps family, he would say. But it never felt like family was helping me. One night in 2017 stands out more than the others. I had just returned from a brutal week at work, putting in 12-hour days to finish a project. I drove to Lansing with bags of groceries and 2 envelopes of cash, one for the mortgage and one for the car. Jessica breezed through the door wearing a brand new leather jacket. She kissed Mom on the cheek and announced that she was thinking of starting a podcast and might need some startup money. Mom clapped like it was the most brilliant idea she had ever heard. Dad reached for his wallet to hand her gas money. No one asked how my project had gone. No one even noticed I had brought the groceries. That was the rhythm of my 20s. Long commutes, late nights, living in a modest apartment while funneling thousands into a house I no longer lived in. I traded vacations for emergency repairs on their furnace. I postponed buying a reliable car so they could replace theirs. Every raise I earned disappeared before I could enjoy it. I remember sitting with my best friend Lauren over glasses of cheap wine in my apartment. She leaned across the table, her eyes sharp. "You do realize they are using you, right?" I laughed it off at first. "They are my parents," I told her. "What am I supposed to do, let them lose the house?" She shook her head. "There is a difference between helping and being an ATM with legs." I wanted to argue, but her words burrowed into me. The truth was hard to face. Every time I sent money, I told myself it was temporary, that things would get better. But they never did. My parents became comfortable with the arrangement. Jessica became entitled to it. And I became the silent provider, the dependable one, the daughter who could always be counted on to clean up their mistakes. Sometimes I looked at my bank statements and felt sick. $30,000 a year gone year after year. Vacations skipped, a house. Never bought, relationships strained, because I was always too tired and too broke to invest in anything of my own. I told myself it was family duty, but the resentment grew heavier with each passing year. I was 28 when I realized that I had not lived a year of adulthood without paying their bills. By the time I turned 32, I had given away more money to them than I had saved for myself. And yet, no matter how much I gave, Jessica remained the star. Mom called her ambitious, Dad called her visionary. I was never called anything at all. That was when the word formed in my mind, sharp and bitter. I was not a daughter. I was a walking ATM. And the worst part was they did not even see it as unusual. It had become my role, carved into stone since childhood. Even now, when I think back on those years, I feel the ache of exhaustion. The long drives, the quiet phone calls, the way I swallowed my frustration until it hardened into silence. I told myself it was only money, that love was worth the sacrifice. But the truth was written in every canceled vacation, every sleepless night, every empty savings account. I was their safety net, their unspoken plan B, and Jessica was their dream. That imbalance, which began in childhood, had only deepened with time. And it was leading me slowly, step by step, toward the breaking point I never saw coming. It was Lauren who saw it most clearly. She had been my closest friend since college, the one who sat across from me during endless nights at the campus coffee shop, both of us surviving on stale muffins and caffeine. By the time we were in our 30s, she had built a quiet life teaching English at a high school in Ann Arbor. And I had built a habit of driving out to see her once or twice a month. We would open a bottle of wine in her small apartment, curl up on the couch, and talk until midnight. On one of those nights, after I had finished complaining about another unexpected bill my parents had dumped on me, she set her glass down hard on the table. Her dark eyes were steady in a way that made me shift uncomfortably. "You do realize they are taking advantage of you, right?" I laughed nervously, swirling the wine in my glass. "They are my parents, Lauren. What am I supposed to do, just let the lights get shut off?" She shook her head slowly like she had heard this script before. That is exactly what I mean. You think their survival depends on you. It doesn't. You are the one holding everything together while they keep treating you like the reliable backup plan. I tried to argue, but the words caught in my throat. There was truth in what she was saying, but I had trained myself not to look at it too closely. A week later, she came over to my apartment in Detroit. I had been saving in a glass jar I kept on the shelf above my desk. Every month after paying my parents' bills, I put whatever small amount I could spare into that jar, a few 20s, sometimes just loose change. It was labeled emergency fund, in black marker, my half-hearted attempt at preparing for my own future. Lauren walked into my living room, saw the jar, and picked it up. She turned it slowly in her hands, the bills and coins shifting inside. Then she placed it back down and let out a sharp laugh that startled me. That is not an emergency fund, Hannah. That is your guilt jar. I frowned, confused. What do you mean? She sat down and leaned forward. You put money in there for them, don't you? You think if you have it ready, then, when they call, you can bail them out. That is not savings. That is you carrying their weight before they even ask. Her words stung because they were true. I opened my mouth to deny it, but she kept going. Every time you put $1 in here, you are reminding yourself that their needs come before yours. That is not family, that is manipulation. I felt my face heat with embarrassment, defensive anger rising, even though I knew she was right. They are my parents, I repeated, softer this time. They gave me everything when I was growing up. Lauren raised an eyebrow. Did they? Did they really give you everything, or did they give Jessica everything while you figured out the rest on your own? That question hung in the air between us. I wanted to snap back to defend Mom and Dad, but my mind went blank. Memories flickered instead. Jessica's bike gleaming under the Christmas tree. My spelling bee ribbon tucked away unseen. The sound of Dad's voice booming for her while I stood on stage alone. Lauren must have seen the change in my expression because her voice softened. I am not saying you have to cut them off tomorrow. I am saying you deserve to live your own life without being drained dry. At some point, you have to ask yourself when enough is enough. That night after she left, I sat on my couch staring at the jar. The word guilt echoed in my head. I had always thought of it as a symbol of my responsibility, proof that I was doing the right thing. Now it looked like a chain keeping me tied to a family that would never notice the sacrifices behind it. The next morning, Mom called. Her voice was sweet, almost rehearsed. Hannah, honey, the water heater has gone out again. It is freezing in the house. I glanced at the jar as she spoke. I could almost feel Lauren's judgment in the silence of my apartment. I transferred the money anyway, muttering to myself that I would rebuild my savings later. At work that week, my manager congratulated me on a project, praising my leadership. My coworkers clapped lightly, and for a moment I felt the pride I had been chasing all my life. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Just got a new leather jacket. You would not believe the deal I found. I knew without asking that Mom or Dad had paid for it. The pride I felt dissolved instantly into something bitter. Lauren invited me over again the following weekend. We sat at her kitchen table while she graded papers, and I picked at a plate of crackers. She asked how things were going, and when I hesitated, she looked at me knowingly. They asked you for money again, didn't they? I sighed, nodding. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. Hannah, this is not sustainable. You are building a life for yourself. They are adults. They can figure it out. I wanted to tell her she did not understand that family was different, that I owed them for raising me. But even as the words formed in my mind, they rang hollow. What had they really given me besides expectations I would always be fine, and the constant reminder that Jessica's failures mattered more than my successes? That night I could not sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. The jar sat in the corner of my room, glowing faintly in the streetlight that slipped through the blinds. I kept seeing Lauren's face when she called it my guilt jar. She was right. It was not just about money. It was about a lifetime of being trained to believe that my worth came from what I could provide, not from who I was. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped. What would happen if the next time Mom called I said no? The thought terrified me. But it also sent a strange ripple of relief through my chest, like opening a window in a stifling room. I turned over and pulled the blanket tighter around me. The question would not go away. Was I truly helping them? Or was I letting myself be used because it was easier than facing the truth? The answer felt too heavy to face, so I closed my eyes and let sleep drag me under, knowing that the doubt had already been planted and that nothing would feel the same again. By the time December rolled around in 2023, I had just finished leading the biggest project of my career. Our team at Midwest FinTech Solutions had delivered a new banking platform ahead of schedule, and the client's feedback was glowing. My manager called me into his office the day before the company holiday party, shook my hand, and said I had leadership potential. There was talk of a promotion in the new year. For the first time in years, I felt like my hard work might finally translate into something tangible for me, not just for the bills I paid on behalf of others. The glow of that moment barely lasted a day before Mom called. Her voice carried that familiar mix of casual and commanding. "Hannah, we've been thinking it might be best if you host Christmas this year. The house feels a little too cramped, and your apartment has such a nice layout." I hesitated with the phone pressed to my ear. My apartment was barely large enough for me and a few friends, but I could already imagine her picking apart every corner if I said no. So I said, "Sure, of course I will handle it." That night I sat at my kitchen table making a list. Turkey, ham, fresh vegetables, pies, good wine table decorations. Lauren came with me to the grocery store that weekend. We pushed a heavy cart through the aisles while I scanned for organic ingredients and specialty items. My total at the register came to more than $400. I tried not to wince as I swiped my card. Lauren gave me a look as I stacked the bags into the trunk. "You do realize none of them are going to appreciate this, right?" I shrugged, trying to mask the sting of her words. "Maybe this year will be different. It is Christmas after all." For a few days I allowed myself to believe it. I imagined the table set with candles, my parents smiling at the meal, Jessica actually contributing something more than complaints. I poured my hope into cooking, into planning, into arranging my small space into something warm and welcoming. 3 days before Christmas, the phone rang again. Mom's voice was casual, almost dismissive. "We have been thinking, Hannah, it might be better if we just do Christmas here at our place. Aunt Barbara mentioned she wants to see the house again. And you know how your dad prefers being home for the holidays." I sat there staring at the bags of groceries I had already started preparing. "But I have bought everything," I said quietly. "I have been planning for weeks." Mom's answer was simple. "Just bring it all here. It will be cozier anyway." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen counter in silence. $400 days of planning, all of it brushed aside with one sentence. I wanted to scream, but instead, I went to the fridge, rearranged the containers, and told myself it would be fine. I would carry it all over. I would make it work. At the office that week, my manager stopped by my desk to ask if I was planning to attend the holiday party. I said yes, but inside I was torn. I wanted to go and celebrate with my team, to show my face in front of the executives who might decide my future. At the same time, I was already drowning in lists for Christmas dinner. When the time came, I stayed late in the kitchen, instead prepping side dishes to transport. Lauren called me that night. She could hear the exhaustion in my voice as I told her about Mom's change of plans. "Hannah, this is exactly what I warned you about. They move the line every time." I tried to laugh it off. "It is Christmas, Lauren. I just want it to go smoothly." There was a long pause before she replied, "Smooth for them, maybe. Not for you." Her words lingered as I scrubbed my counters and packed casserole dishes into aluminum trays. I thought about the project I had just finished at work, the way my boss had looked at me with genuine pride. For once, I was being recognized for my effort. Yet here I was again, putting everything into a holiday that would never earn me more than a shrug. Still, when the sun rose on Christmas Eve, I loaded my car with boxes, bags, and trays. I tucked the bottles of wine into the trunk, covered the pies carefully with foil, and drove toward Lansing with the radio playing soft carols. The roads were slick with slush, and I gripped the wheel tightly, rehearsing in my head how I would keep my patience no matter what was said. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, a little tired, but decorated with strings of colored lights that blinked unevenly. Dad's old truck sat in the driveway, and the front window glowed with the light of the Christmas tree. I carried the first load of bags up the steps, my arms aching, and knocked with my elbow. Dad opened the door after a long moment, glanced at the bags, and said, "You are blocking the driveway. Jessica will need to park there when she gets here." He stepped aside, not even offering to help. Inside, Mom came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands. Her eyes swept over my sweater dress, and her lips tightened into a smile. "Look at you all dressed up. Some of us have been cooking since 6 this morning." I forced a polite smile and set the bags on the counter. "I brought everything prepped and ready to cook." "The oven is yours," she said already, turning back toward her own pot of stuffing. "You know how your father only likes my recipe." I stood there with my carefully prepared trays and felt the weight of it all. The money, the effort, the time. And yet I said nothing. I washed my hands, tied on an apron, and started arranging dishes, because despite every warning from Lauren, despite the voice in my head telling me I was repeating the same cycle, I still wanted to believe that if I tried hard enough, this Christmas could be different. That hope, fragile as it was, carried me through the rest of the evening. I cooked, I smiled, I ignored the small comments. And deep inside I told myself that maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough at it, my family would finally see me. The next morning I made the drive back to Lansing with my trunk still packed full of trays and bags. Snow dusted the highway, and the air had that sharp December bite that always made me feel both nostalgic and uneasy. When I turned into my parents' street, every other house seemed alive with cheerful decorations. Kids were outside building snowmen, and neighbors waved at one another with cups of coffee in hand. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, my chest already felt tight. I parked in the same spot I always used, right near the garage. My car was only a mid-range sedan bought after years of driving the old college car into the ground, but to me it felt like an accomplishment. Dad stepped out of the front door as I was unloading the first set of bags. His eyes slid over the car and then back to me. "Seems awfully fancy for someone your age," he muttered. I gripped the grocery bag tighter and forced a smile. "It is just reliable, Dad. I needed something safe for the drive into Detroit." He shrugged and walked back inside without another word. I hauled 3 more bags to the porch, my arms aching from the weight. No one offered to help. Mom appeared in the doorway just as I was setting the food down in the kitchen. She looked me up and down, her lips curving into a faint smile that did not reach her eyes. "All dressed up," she said. "Some of us have been busy since dawn, no time for all that." She waved a hand vaguely at my hair and the simple burgundy sweater dress I had bought just for the holiday. I swallowed the sting and said lightly, "I thought it might be nice to look festive." She was already turning back to the stove, stirring a pot of stuffing. The smell filled the kitchen, but instead of warmth, it carried a note of territory, like she was reminding me that this was her domain. I set the pies on the counter, careful not to crowd her space, and asked if she needed anything. She shook her head. "Just do not over-season the potatoes. You know your father only likes mine." The words were sharp but familiar. I lined up the wine bottles on the table, unwrapping the labels. Not once did she say thank you for the groceries or the hours I had already spent prepping dishes. Dad passed through the kitchen at one point, grabbing a beer from the fridge. He glanced at the neatly stacked trays on the counter and then at me. "You spent a lot, didn't you? Should probably be saving instead of throwing money at food." Before I could respond, he popped the cap and walked out toward the living room. The weight of their dismissals pressed on me as I tried to keep busy. I arranged the serving spoons, set the table with the cloth I had brought, and tucked little sprigs of pine next to the napkins to make it feel special. When I stepped back to admire it, I wanted them to see the effort. Instead, Mom leaned in from the kitchen and said, "Maybe next year stick with plain napkins, this looks a little too much." I bit my tongue. The room felt colder than the snow outside. My hands shook as I adjusted the plates again, not because they needed fixing, but because I needed something to do. The television droned in the living room, the sound of a football game filling the silence that settled between us. Dad shouted once at the screen, his voice louder than it had been for me all morning. Mom hummed softly as she tasted her stuffing, never acknowledging the smell of roasted vegetables I had carried from Detroit. Every time I walked into the room carrying another dish, it felt like stepping into a wall of indifference. I had poured my paycheck and my energy into this holiday, and all I got in return were sideways comments about my clothes, my car, my choices. When the doorbell rang, I froze for a second, wiping my hands on a towel. The sound of cheerful greetings filled the hallway as Aunt Barbara and Uncle George stepped inside with their daughter Natalie. Mom's voice suddenly grew warmer. "Oh, you made it! Come in, come in!" She fussed over their coats, her tone full of the kind of affection I had been craving all morning. I came out to greet them with a smile I barely managed to hold. Barbara hugged me tightly and whispered, "You look wonderful, dear." Natalie grinned and offered to help in the kitchen. I led her back, grateful for the company. As she chopped celery for me, she whispered under her breath, "Your table looks beautiful." My chest ached with relief at the small acknowledgement. Still, the air in the house remained heavy. Every comment from my parents was another reminder that I was out of place, too polished, too independent, too much. It was as though the more I tried to bring warmth into the house, the more determined they were to keep me cold. By the time I checked the turkey in the oven, my patience was worn thin. I stood with the oven mitts on, staring at the bird browning perfectly, and felt a wave of exhaustion crash over me. I had been smiling for hours, ignoring the sting of their words, pretending not to notice the lack of gratitude. As I closed the oven door, I knew deep down that no amount of effort would ever make them see me differently. The house was full of holiday scents and soft music, but underneath it all lay a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. The celebration had not even begun yet already. The weight of dismissal settled heavy on my shoulders, pressing down harder than I wanted to admit. The front door opened with a rush of cold air, and Jessica's laugh filled the hallway before I even saw her. She arrived nearly an hour late, her boots clicking against the tile, as if the whole evening had been waiting on her. Dad jumped up from his recliner, his face lighting up in a way I had not seen all day. There she is, the star of the show. Mom hurried in behind him, arms wide, wrapping Jessica in a hug so tight it almost looked desperate. Jessica shook off her coat and tossed her shiny hair over her shoulder. She looked every bit like someone walking into a stage set just for her. Her voice carried as she announced, "Sorry I am late. Had to stop by a friend's to talk about my new business idea." Dad beamed as if she had just revealed a winning lottery ticket. I stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping my hands on a towel, trying to calm the burn rising in my chest. The way they glowed at her arrival was in sharp contrast to the silence that had met me that morning. Jessica dropped her purse on the table and leaned back in a chair, crossing her legs. "So I have been working on something big. A fitness app. It is going to revolutionize home workouts." Dad leaned forward, nodding, as if she were unveiling a masterpiece. "Tell us more, sweetheart." Jessica's eyes sparkled. "I have the concept all mapped out. It just needs funding, maybe $40,000 to get the prototype built and the marketing launched. But once it takes off, it will be huge. People are desperate for fitness solutions at home." Mom clasped her hands, looking at her like she was a visionary. "That sounds incredible, Jess. You always have such ideas." Dad grinned proudly, already convinced of her success. I listened quietly for a moment, my pulse quickening. Then I asked, "What makes it different from the hundreds of apps already on the market? Do you have developers lined up? Have you researched the failure rate in that industry?" Jessica's smile faltered. She waved a hand dismissively. "I am not worried about competition. Mine will have a unique angle. You would not understand, Hannah." I took a slow breath. "I actually work in tech. I know how investors think. You need more than just an idea." Before I could finish, Mom cut in sharply. "Don't ruin Christmas, Hannah. Let your sister share her dream without all the criticism." The room went silent for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space. I looked at Jessica, who smirked and leaned back in her chair. "You know what your problem is, Hannah. You are so boring. Always safe, always stuck in your little cubicle world. Some of us actually take risks. Her words hit harder than I expected. I thought of the nights I stayed up until 2 in the morning coding the weekend's sacrifice to projects, the money I poured into keeping our parents' home afloat. I wanted to remind her of all the times her so-called risks had ended in disasters. The food truck idea that never got off the ground. The boutique that swallowed thousands of mom and dad's savings. The crypto scheme that left them nearly broke. I could not stop myself. Jess, how many times have you borrowed money and never paid it back? How many projects have you started only to drop them when it got hard? Jessica's face flushed red, her eyes narrowing. That is different. At least I am trying to do something big with my life. You are just jealous. Dad's voice rose from across the room. Enough, Hannah. Don't drag down your sister. Tonight is about family. Family? The words stung like a slap. I bit the inside of my cheek and turned back to the kitchen, forcing myself to stir the potatoes, even though my hands trembled. Behind me, I could hear Jessica laughing again, already spinning her dream, as if my questions had never been asked. Mom's encouraging hums and Dad's booming voice carried through the air, filling the space with their unwavering faith in her. Natalie came in quietly to help me set the table. She glanced at me, her voice low. Don't let her get to you. We all know how it goes. I gave her a tight smile, grateful for her kindness but too tired to answer. As I placed the silverware carefully beside each plate, I could still hear Jessica in the background describing her app, talking about influencers and sponsorships. Each word was another reminder of the gulf between us, of how she could fail a dozen times and still be praised for dreaming, while I was dismissed for building something real. By the time I lit the candles, the atmosphere had shifted completely. For Mom and Dad, the holiday had truly begun the moment Jessica walked in. For me, the air was heavier than ever, filled with the sharp edge of dismissal and the familiar ache of being the outsider in my own family. The table was finally set, every dish steaming and ready, the silverware shining under the glow of the candles. I carried the last tray of roasted vegetables into the dining room and set it down, my hands trembling only slightly from the weight. Everyone took their seats, with Dad at the head of the table, Jessica right beside him, and Mom across from her. I noticed the placement immediately. I had been left to the far end, wedged between Aunt Barbara and Natalie, as though the work I had poured into this evening was not reason enough to sit near the center of attention. Dad cleared his throat, the room falling silent, except for the crackle of the fireplace. He bowed his head and we all followed. Lord, we thank you for this food, for bringing us together this Christmas, and for the blessing of having Jessica home with us. His voice was strong, deliberate. I lifted my eyes for a second, waiting for my name to follow, for even the faintest acknowledgement that I had been the one to make all of this possible. But it never came. He ended the prayer quickly, and we all murmured amen. As the dishes began to pass around, Jessica picked up her fork with a flourish like the night was hers alone. She leaned forward, excitement lighting up her face. So I have something I need to share with everyone. She dabbed her lips with a napkin and launched into her pitch. It is a fitness app unlike anything on the market. The way people are focused on health now, it is the perfect time. I just need about $40,000 to get the prototype built and start the marketing push. Once it takes off, it is going to change the game. Mom clasped her hands together, smiling with pride. That sounds incredible, Jess. You always think so big. Dad nodded, his chest puffed out. Our daughter, the entrepreneur. I stabbed at the mashed potatoes on my plate, my stomach turning. Finally, I said, keeping my voice steady, what makes this app different from the hundreds already out there? Have you done any research on competition or customer needs? Jessica's smile tightened, and she waved her fork in the air. Hannah, you always worry too much. It will have a unique angle. I am not going to share the specifics here. People steal ideas all the time, you know. I pressed gently. Investors will need more than just an idea. They will want numbers-proof strategy. Mom cut in sharply, her voice edged with warning. Don't ruin Christmas with all your negativity. Let your sister dream. The table went quiet again, the only sound the clinking of silverware. Jessica smirked and leaned back in her chair. You know what your problem is, Hannah. You live such a boring little life. Safe jobs, safe choices. You are too afraid to take risks, and that is why you will never do anything extraordinary." Her words stung not because I believed them, but because they echoed the very thing my parents had always implied. I thought of the long nights I had spent coding the projects I had led, the sacrifices I had made. I thought of the bills I paid month after month to keep this very house standing. My blood pulsed hot in my ears. I set down my fork and looked directly at Jessica. "Do you want to talk about risks? How many times have you borrowed money and never paid it back? How many ventures have you started and abandoned when it got too hard? The food truck, the boutique, the crypto scheme. All disasters. All funded by Mom and Dad, and when that wasn't enough, by me." Jessica flushed crimson, her eyes darting toward Mom and Dad. "That's different. At least I am brave enough to try. You just hide behind your paycheck." Dad's voice thundered from the head of the table. "Enough. Stop tearing your sister down." I took a slow breath, my voice calmer than I felt. "I am not tearing anyone down. I am telling the truth. For 8 years I have been paying for this house to stand. $800 a month for the mortgage. $400 for utilities. $600 for car payments. Add insurance, phones, internet streaming, and emergencies. Every year nearly $30,000 gone. Over 8 years, that is close to $250,000. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Aunt Barbara's eyes widened, and Uncle George leaned back in his chair, stunned. Natalie stared at me as if hearing all of this for the first time. Jessica opened her mouth, but no words came. Mom's face drained of color, her hand shaking as she set down her glass of wine. Dad slammed his fist against the table so hard the plates rattled. "You think paying bills makes you family. It doesn't. Family is about loyalty, not money. Get out." The words hit harder than the sound of his fist. My own father shouting at me to leave the home I had been quietly supporting all these years. I swallowed hard, feeling the room spin. Mom leaned closer, her voice sharp but quiet, meant for me alone. "You are just jealous of your sister. You always have been." That was the knife twisting deeper. After all the sleepless nights, the missed vacations, the financial sacrifices, that was how she defined me. Jealous. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. My hands were steady now, though my chest burned with the weight of every unspoken word. "Fine. If that is how you feel, then let her pay the $8,600. Gasps rippled across the table. Jessica's face turned scarlet. She looked to our parents, desperate for them to shield her. Dad glared at me, but the fury in his eyes no longer scared me. Aunt Barbara reached out as if to say something, but stopped herself. Uncle George shook his head slightly, his face clouded with disbelief. Natalie sat frozen, her fork still in her hand, her eyes wide. I laid my napkin gently on the table beside my plate. For once my voice was calm and clear. "I am done pretending. I am done carrying the weight and being treated like I don't exist." The room stayed silent, thick with the shock of what I had said. The only sound was the faint whistle of the wind outside and the steady beat of my heart. I picked up my purse, slung it over my shoulder, and looked once at the table where every face showed something different. Rage, guilt, shock, shame. Then I turned toward the hallway, each step away from that table, feeling like a release I had waited my whole life to take. Natalie caught up to me in the hallway, her hand brushing my arm before I reached the door. Her voice trembled but carried more strength than I expected. "Please don't let them make you feel small, Hannah. We all see how much you do, even if they never say it." Her eyes were wide with worry, the kind of genuine concern I had never received from my own parents. I managed a weak smile, squeezed her hand, and whispered thank you before pulling my coat tight and stepping out into the cold night. The air hit me like ice, and for a moment I just stood on the porch staring at the snow swirling under the streetlight. Behind me I could still hear muffled voices rising at the table, but I no longer cared to decipher them. My car sat alone in the driveway, a thin layer of frost coating the windshield. I slid into the driver's seat, my fingers stiff as I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, and with it came a sob that tore its way out of my chest. I drove through Lansing with tears blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold. By the time I reached the highway toward Detroit, the sobs had quieted into shaky breaths. Still, I could not face the emptiness of my apartment yet. On impulse, I turned off at an exit and followed the winding road to Riverside Park, a place I had not been in years. The Grand River was dark, and still the trees bare against the winter sky. I parked near the overlook and shut off the engine. The silence was deafening. I buried my face in my hands and finally let go, crying so hard my whole body shook. Every word from that table echoed in my head. Paying bills doesn't make you family. You are just jealous. The weight of 8 years of sacrifice pressed down on me until I felt like I might collapse. A soft knock on my window startled me. It was Lauren, her face pale from the cold, but full of determination. I unlocked the door and she slid into the passenger seat, without a word, wrapping her arms around me. "I don't know what happened exactly, but I know you're done," she murmured. "You can't keep letting them bleed you dry." I wiped my eyes and told her everything. The prayer that never mentioned me. The app pitch. The outburst. The moment Dad screamed at me to leave. Lauren listened without interrupting, her hand steady on my arm. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Hannah, it is time. You have carried them long enough. They disowned you tonight. You have to let them live without you." Her words settled into me with a clarity I had never allowed before. I thought about my apartment, about the jar on the shelf that Lauren had once called my guilt jar. I thought about every bill that had been drafted from my account, every emergency I had solved while they praised Jessica for her dreams. I opened my laptop right there in the car, the screen glowing in the dark. My fingers flew across the keys as I pulled up my records. Mortgage $800 a month, utilities $400, car payments $600, insurance $180, phones $120, internet and cable $150, streaming $45, emergency extras $200. I typed the totals and added them line by line. The number stared back at me, cold and undeniable. Nearly $30,000 a year. Over 8 years, close to $250,000. My hands trembled as I read it again and again. I could have bought a house with that money. I could have built an investment portfolio. I could have built a future. Instead, I had built nothing but their comfort, and in return I was told I did not belong. Lauren leaned closer, her voice low but steady. "This is your proof. This is everything you have done. It's time to stop." I closed my eyes, letting the number burn itself into my mind. For years I had equated sacrifice with love, thinking if I gave enough one day they would finally see me. But love was never returned, only expectation. When I opened my eyes again, the tears had dried. My chest still hurt, but beneath the pain was something new. Resolve. For the first time, I was not just mourning what I had lost. I was beginning to see the shape of what I could reclaim. I shut the laptop gently and rested my hands on it. "I am done," I whispered, more to myself than to Lauren. "This ends now." Lauren nodded, her eyes soft with pride. "Good. It is time you took back your life." We sat in silence for a while, the river stretching dark and endless before us, the cold seeping through the windows. Yet for the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom stirring in my chest. When I finally started the car again, I no longer felt like I was running from the house I had left behind. I felt like I was driving toward something new, though I did not yet know what it would look like. What I did know was simple. The cycle had been broken. The guilt jar would no longer define me. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, the streets were empty, the world quiet under a blanket of snow. I carried the laptop upstairs, set it on my desk, and sat staring at the spreadsheet one more time. The number still glared back, but now it did not feel like a chain. It felt like a map showing me every step I had taken and pointing to the place where I would finally stop. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. For the first time in years, I was not planning how to save them. I was planning how to save myself. I turned the laptop back on and opened every account I had been managing for years. The mortgage was first. I pulled up the auto payment settings, my name listed as the account holder, the payment scheduled for the first of every month. My finger hovered for a moment over the cancel button. Then I clicked. A confirmation screen appeared asking if I was sure. I pressed yes. The weight that left my chest was immediate. Next came the utilities. Electric, water, gas. All of them linked to my debit card, all of them quietly draining me month after month. I removed my information, typed in Dad's full name, and forwarded the login details to his email. The confirmation message told me billing responsibility had been transferred. I imagined their faces when the next statement arrived. The car loans were harder. I remembered the night I signed the first payment, telling myself it was temporary. I remembered Dad handing Jessica the keys like he had earned them himself while I stood in the doorway with empty hands. Now I stared at the account balance, my name tied to both vehicles. With a steady breath, I called the lender, waded through the automated prompts, and finally reached a representative. I explained calmly that I would no longer be responsible and that the payments must revert to Robert and Linda Miller. She confirmed my request and promised paperwork would be mailed. When I hung up, my palms were damp, but my heart felt steady. Insurance was next. Auto, home, medical. Every policy tied to my accounts. I pulled each one up line by line and sent official cancellation notices. I copied Mom on the emails with a short note. You are now responsible for these premiums. I will not be renewing coverage. Then came the family cell phone plan. That one made me laugh bitterly. For years they had complained about the bill while refusing to drop Jessica's newest iPhone upgrade. I opened the provider's site, changed the password, and removed every device except mine. I sent another email. Service for your numbers will be suspended in 3 days, unless you create your own plan. The internet and cable followed. The login showed streaming marathons, late-night game shows, and endless data usage that I had funded without a word. I deleted my card and removed their devices. For the first time in 8 years, their Wi-Fi would not be mine to provide. Finally, I turned to the home security system. That one had been my idea after a neighbor's break-in 2 winters ago. I had spent nearly $1,000 on cameras, sensors, and smart locks, convincing myself I was keeping them safe. Now I opened the dashboard, exported their settings, and pressed the shutdown button. The screen warned me that all devices would go offline within minutes. I clicked anyway. Through the camera feed, I saw the Christmas tree lights flicker once and then go dark. The living room plunged into shadow. The smart thermostat disconnected. The locks reset. One by one, the icons grayed out until the house I had protected for years sat in complete silence, powerless and unguarded. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It felt like watching the end of a chapter in my life. That house was no longer my burden to manage. My parents would wake to darkness, confusion, maybe even panic. But for me, it was liberation. The clock read nearly midnight when I finally closed the laptop. My apartment was quiet, but not the suffocating quiet I had felt so many times before. This quiet felt earned. I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the snow falling steadily under the street lamps. For the first time in nearly a decade, there were no payments hanging over my head, no alerts waiting on my phone, no emergencies ready to pull me back into their orbit. The accounts were closed, the ties severed. As I sipped the water, I thought about the words Dad had shouted at me. Paying bills doesn't make you family. He was right in a way, though not the way he intended. Family is not proven through money, but it is also not destroyed by refusing to be used. I set the glass down, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle around me. This time it was not frightening, it was peaceful. And as I climbed into bed, I knew the real storm would arrive in the morning. The sun was already high when I finally stirred the faint glow of winter light spilling through the blinds. My head felt heavy, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of what I had done. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and the screen lit up with more notifications than I had ever seen. 43 missed calls, 68 unread text messages, a dozen voicemails. My chest tightened as I scrolled each notification, another reminder that the storm had broken. The first voicemail was from Mom, her voice high and frantic. Hannah, what is going on? The power went out, the heat shut off, everything stopped working. We can't even make coffee. You need to fix this right now. The second was from Dad, his tone cold and cutting. "Whatever game you are playing, it ends today. You have until noon to restore the accounts, or I am contacting our lawyer. This is elder abuse, Hannah, and it is against the law." Jessica's voice came next, shrill and furious. "You've ruined Christmas. Do you even realize what you've done? I was supposed to have an important meeting today, and now I can't even leave the house because the car is gone. You are pathetic, Hannah. Fix this or don't bother calling yourself my sister." The next message twisted the knife further. "Mom," again, her words trembling. "Your father had chest pains this morning. He's at the hospital now. The stress of what you did pushed him over the edge. If anything happens to him, it will be on you. Please, Hannah, call me back." My stomach dropped, guilt flooding me in an instant. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed to my chest. Had I really caused a heart attack? Was my father lying in a hospital bed because I finally stood up for myself? Before panic swallowed me whole, another notification buzzed. A text from Natalie. "Don't believe what they are saying. No one is at the hospital. They are at the house with police officers. Uncle Robert looks fine, just angry." I let out a shaky breath and scrolled further. Another voicemail, this time Dad again, voice booming with rage. "You think you can humiliate us? I told the officers everything. You've hacked our accounts. You're going to regret this." I opened the security app on my laptop, half afraid I had already lost access. To my surprise, the backup feed I had downloaded still connected. The screen flickered to life, showing the living room of the house I had once protected. There they were, all three of them. Dad pacing with red cheeks, waving his arms at two uniformed police officers who looked more confused than convinced. Mom sat on the couch, wringing her hands, not a tear on her face despite the voicemail about crying at the hospital. Jessica stood by the Christmas tree, arms crossed, scowling like a teenager who had just been grounded. The cameras had no sound, but their body language told me everything. Dad was not sick. He was angry. Mom was not broken. She was pretending. Jessica was not a victim. She was fuming at losing control. I sat back in my chair, the knot of guilt loosening as quickly as it had formed. Their lie had been exposed before it even had time to take root. Another text came through from Natalie. "The police are leaving soon. They told your parents this is a civil matter. Everyone is upset, but honestly they looked embarrassed when the officers didn't take their side." I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. Embarrassed. That was new. For years they had hidden behind me, behind the comfort I provided, behind the image of a perfect family. But now the curtain had been pulled back. The neighbors would see the police cars. Relatives would hear whispers. Their pride had cracked, and I had not even needed to raise my voice. I opened one more voicemail, curiosity pulling me despite myself. This one was from Mom again, her voice lower this time, almost pleading. "Hannah, please. The mortgage company called. They said the payment was canceled. What are we supposed to do? We don't have that kind of money. Just come over, talk this out. We can fix this as a family." Family. The word no longer stung. It rang hollow, stripped of the power it once had over me. I set the phone down, letting it buzz again with another call I did not answer. For the first time in years, their chaos was not mine to manage. The lies, the threats, the dramatics. They could keep all of it. I turned back to the laptop, the frozen feed, still showing the darkened living room. The Christmas tree lights were off, the house wrapped in shadows. It was more than a technical shutdown. It was a symbol. The control they had over me, the expectation, the guilt had gone out just as suddenly as those lights. The storm had come exactly as I had expected, but for the first time I was standing on the outside of it, watching rather than drowning. And as the snow fell quietly outside my window, I realized their lies could no longer bind me. They had lost the power to keep me in the dark. Dad's voice boomed through my voicemail again that afternoon, harsher than ever. He barked that he had already spoken with my cousin Gary, who was a lawyer, and that what I had done could be considered financial abuse. He swore papers were being drawn up, and that I would regret humiliating him in front of the neighbors. I stared at the phone for a long moment before pulling up Gary's number myself. We had not spoken in years, not since a family reunion when Jessica had paraded around pretending she had a thriving boutique, while I quietly cleaned up the barbecue mess. Gary answered on the second ring, his voice brisk but not unfriendly. Hannah, long time. What's going on? I explained everything from the years of payments to the dinner table explosion to Dad's threats. When I finished, there was a silence, then a laugh. Hannah, your father is bluffing. There is no law in Michigan or anywhere else that requires an adult child to financially support their parents. You were doing it voluntarily. If anything, continuing under those conditions could look like exploitation on their part, not yours. He paused. And the accounts were in your name, correct? Yes, all of them, I replied. Then you had every legal right to close them. End of story. Relief washed over me so quickly my knees went weak. Thank you, Gary, I whispered, meaning it more than I had expected. He cleared his throat. Honestly, Hannah, I'm glad you called. People have seen the way things work in your family for years. Maybe now it's time the truth comes out. Later that day, Aunt Barbara called. I could hear the tightness in her voice. The police left hours ago, but the whole neighborhood saw. People are talking. Robert made such a scene. I'm sorry, honey, but you should know you're not the one they're criticizing. It's them. I pictured the squad cars in the driveway, the flashing lights bouncing against the houses on the street. Neighbors peeking from behind curtains, whispers forming before the officers had even driven away. The Millers, the proud family, undone on Christmas morning. Uncle George got on the line next. You did what you had to do, Hannah. We all know how much you've carried. Frankly, I'm surprised it took this long. The most surprising call came later that evening from Aunt Diane, my mom's older sister. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I should have said something years ago. I saw how they favored Jessica, how they leaned on you. But every time I tried to bring it up, your mother shut me out. She went quiet for a moment. People deserve to know the truth, Hannah. You've been keeping that family afloat while Jessica drained them dry. Her words struck like a bolt of clarity. It wasn't just me who knew. Others had seen too. The next day, Barbara and George went over to my parents' house, and Natalie later told me what happened. They sat in the living room with Mom and Dad, the air thick with embarrassment. Barbara said firmly that she had watched me bring groceries year after year, watched me sacrifice vacations, and that enough was enough. Diane backed her up, reminding them that Jessica had borrowed thousands over the years and never once repaid a cent. Jessica tried to protest, but George cut her off. Everyone knows Jess. We've watched you spin one scheme after another, while Hannah quietly covered the basics. You've been lying to your own parents, letting them believe you were helping when it was Hannah all along. Natalie described the silence that followed. Mom's face drained of color, Dad's jaw clenched so tightly he could not speak, and Jessica for once in her life had nothing to say. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She sat there exposed, with no defense left. The image gave me a strange mix of sorrow and satisfaction. Sorrow for the years wasted, for the love I had chased like a mirage. Satisfaction because finally the truth had been spoken out loud, not just by me, but by others who had seen and chosen to stay silent until now. By evening, more messages trickled in this time from relatives who had heard the story. Some were sympathetic, some angry at my parents for putting me in that position, and a few simply curious. The narrative my parents had spun for years, that Jessica was the golden child and I was the distant one, had cracked wide open. I sat by my window again that night, the snow falling in soft sheets across Detroit, and thought about justice. Not the kind you find in courtrooms or contracts, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes when the truth can no longer be hidden, when the lies collapse under their own weight. Jessica's silence at that living room confrontation echoed in my mind. For all her bravado, all her big talk, she had been unmasked in front of the very people who had always believed her. And my parents, who had thrown me out of their Christmas dinner, were now sitting in the wreckage of their pride, forced to face what they had ignored for far too long. The consequences had finally begun, not by my hands, but by the truth itself. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. I only needed to let it play out. Winter turned to spring, and the distance between me and my parents became more than just emotional. It was practical, measured in bills they now had to pay, and responsibilities they could no longer shift onto me. Word reached me through Natalie and Barbara about the changes at their house. Dad had taken a part-time job as a security guard at a warehouse in Lansing. The man who once carried himself with pride about running an auto plant shift was now standing watch at a gate. Mom had quietly added more hours at the dental office, her cheerful front at work hiding the exhaustion at home. Jessica, who had spoken so confidently about her fitness app, had let it dissolve like all the projects before it. Without family money to cushion her, she had taken a job at a sporting goods store folding leggings and selling sneakers. The irony was not lost on me. While their lives adjusted downward, mine shifted upward. At the fintech company in Detroit, my team's successful project earned me more recognition than I had ever expected. In March, my manager called me into his office and told me I was being considered for a leadership position. A promotion that would have seemed out of reach a year earlier suddenly felt possible, maybe even deserved. I poured my energy into work, not because I needed to prove myself to my family anymore, but because I finally wanted to prove something to myself. Outside of work, I made time for healing. I found a therapist in downtown Detroit who specialized in family trauma. Every Tuesday evening, I sat in a small office with warm lighting and poured out pieces of myself I had never shared before. The anger, the guilt, the endless hunger for validation. Slowly, week by week, the heaviness began to lift. In January, I joined a support group for adult children of toxic parents. Sitting in a circle of strangers who spoke stories so similar to mine was both heartbreaking and liberating. We laughed together about manipulations that once made us cry. We recognized patterns that had kept us trapped. We encouraged one another when doubt crept in. For the first time, I felt less alone. By April, I rewarded myself with something small but meaningful. I booked a weekend trip to Chicago, staying at a boutique hotel near the river. It was the same city where years earlier I had sent my parents for Mom's birthday, footing the bill, while they barely thanked me. This time I walked through Millennium Park on my own, drank coffee at a rooftop cafe, and allowed myself to savor the luxury without guilt. The freedom tasted better than anything I had known. It was during that trip that I met Michael, a friend of a friend who happened to join us for dinner one night. He was an architect, tall and thoughtful, with a laugh that filled the room without needing to be loud. I hesitated at first, unsure if I had the energy for anything new. But on our third date, when I finally told him the story of my family, he reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said softly, "Family is not who you are born to. Family is who treats you like you matter." Those words sank into me deeper than I expected. They reminded me of Barbara's calls, of George's steady support, of Diane's confession, of Natalie's brave honesty. The people who had stood by me after the collapse of Christmas were the ones who deserved the title of family. They checked on me without demanding. They celebrated my achievements without envy. They loved me without conditions. Months later, I still heard occasional whispers of my parents' struggles. They had sold the old house and moved into a modest rental. Dad complained often, but he kept working. Mom's health wavered with the extra hours. Jessica still spun stories about new opportunities, but no one was funding her anymore. Their world had changed, and though part of me felt a flicker of pity, I knew it was not mine to fix. Instead, I built something different. I filled my apartment with laughter from friends, with quiet from evenings alone, with the steady hum of a life no longer chained to guilt. My savings account grew, my confidence grew, and with Michael by my side, I began to imagine a future that was mine, built not on sacrifice for others, but on balance and choice. When I look back now at that Christmas night, I no longer feel only pain. I see it as the moment I was freed. The night the lies broke apart and the truth finally took shape. The night I stopped begging to belong and started choosing where I did. If you have ever faced a family who made you feel less, who took your giving for granted, who confused loyalty with control, know this: you are not alone. And you have the right to step away, to heal, to build something better. I would love to hear if my story resonates with you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? What helped you find your strength? Share your thoughts in the comments. Give this story a like if it spoke to you, and subscribe if you want to hear more journeys like mine. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, and remember, Real family is not defined by obligation. Real family is who treats you like you matter.